Welcome to the Solidarity Cafe. We're here at the Labour Party conference to talk about leasehold reform this afternoon, but over the next 2 days we'll be offering lots of ideas and some very strong coffee to all those who want to join us. Today, though, very timely, last night the consultation that the government's put out on leasehold has closed, and today I've got two staunch campaigners with me. Shula, how long have you been working on this issue?
I first met leasehold reform in the late 1990s when my block got a bill for £2 million, and then I realised we were an open chequebook.
Yeah, absolutely. And Harry, what about you?
Not as long, nowhere near as long as Sheila, but 2017, my mum was being shaken down for cash by an offshore billionaire who's ruining our lives, basically, and that made me go national with the campaigning.
Okay. And of course, I first came across leasehold when I was first an MP. I was a very young MP in those days, and it's a shame that here we are, 28 years later, still having to campaign on the same issue because we've got some of the same problems. But look, there is optimism, isn't there? Because we know that the government has already done something in the 24 Act, and we're now trying to refine the details of that. And I want to talk to you a bit about that. Harry, I'll come to you first on that. But also, we're moving forward to the next phase, Shula, where the government ultimately is moving us towards common hold system, and that in a sense is the gold standard. So Harry, talk us through some of the points in the consultation that has just closed. What is it the government's trying to do? How are they proposing to give leaseholders like your mum a better opportunity to control their own lives?
Well, I think they've pitched this consultation as, one of the core problems of leasehold is a lack of transparency. Not necessarily a lack of control, which for our campaign is the issue, but they're proposing a load of transparency requirements on landlords, managing agents, and to actually open it all up. But obviously there is the other argument about what we don't necessarily want is regulation, we want liberation. But there are some good things in there, one of which you campaigned on very aggressively under the Tory government last time was Section 24. So the right to get a court-appointed manager. So when your landlord's doing something really terrible, it's a very, very old right from the 80s. You can get a manager in that can, it's like a hospital, which, under special measures, you've got someone that's very powerful that runs a building in the best interest of the building. And they're now saying we should make that easier. We should make that more modern. We should make that more accessible. And are there things that we've not thought about that could help leaseholders? So that we're very positive about.
Look, that sounds great, but tell me this. Why don't the people who are living in those flats have the right to decide for themselves who they want to manage in the first place?
So England and Wales are almost exception in the world that has this leasehold system, which basically means you pay a premium, you buy your property, but you don't actually own it because there's a landlord or a freeholder that has a whip hand over, the biggest purchase of your life normally and the running costs. And the problem is you're talking about you've been doing this for 28 years. You know as well as I do, much better than I do, this is a multi-billion-pound industry. This is like going up against big tobacco, big oil. These guys have got the cash to splash on lawmakers, on ministers, on civil servants, and that it doesn't matter who comes into power, whether it's Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem, maybe Reform next time, the gravy train stays on the rails. And that's what we're concerned about, is that, yes, transparency is fine. We don't want to know by how much we're being ripped off by. We don't want to be ripped off. So give us control. Because these freeholders that only own, a fraction of value. They've invested 2.5% capital value. My mum, her neighbours, they own most of it. So all we're saying is let's buy out these little parasites so we can own the building and have control. Because that's the rest of the world. That's Scotland as well.
Yeah, look, you're right. I think everywhere in the world, every single country in the world now has left residential leasehold behind. I think Hong Kong used to have it, but even they've abolished it now. Shula, tell me about your experience and how you found, you said this was a £2 million charge. that they were levying against your building. How did that all work out? And again, try and explain, because I genuinely don't think that most people out there understand why it is that you who've paid for your flat don't actually have the right to control what happens in that building.
When I first met Leasehold, I thought that it was brain for brain. So when we got the £2 million bill, and I had just left London School of Economics, and we used to march up and down with banners saying we were all angry now, I was sure that brain for brain we could beat our freeholder. And having carried on for, I think, 18 months, I realised it wasn't brain for brain. It was brain against money. And they were deep pocket, and we had almost no pocket at all. And they said, if you carry on fighting, you will be homeless and bankrupt.
So tell us, because this is really interesting, the way in which these landlords use the legal system. If you can maybe talk about the first tier tribunals and what happens and how they really do try and blast you out of the water at that level.
In those days, there was no first tier tribunal, and we ended up in the High Court against the firm of Mars, who at that time one of the richest families in the world, and they used their money in the High Court to finance the case. And although we knew we were in the right, we didn't have the money to carry on. After that, in the 2002 Act, when first tier tribunals were introduced, we could have made it. At that time, we didn't. But we made so much of a stir that they actually sold the freehold secretly over Christmas, which I had read that was exactly what they were going to do, because they didn't think we were organised, but we were, because I'd read that. And using the 1987 Landlord and Tenant Act, we got it back. We bought our own freehold, and since then we have never looked back, and we're a fully functioning democracy. And the nearest to that will be Commonhold now.
Well, that is a real success. Yeah. But just, again, explain to people the difference between owning a flat in a building where somebody else owns the freehold of that building. What do you actually own?
All you own is the fag end of a tenancy agreement, basically.
So the right to live there for a period of time.
You think you buy a flat. It shouldn't be allowed to be sold in that way. You do not buy a flat, you buy a lease. And what's more, it's the only contract that is passed on without being able to amend it. Every other contract will come under unfair contract terms for an individual, but a lease doesn't. And one still has hugely unfair terms in the lease that the new owner cannot alter.
Well, let's move on to some of those terms. Let's talk about the unfairnesses that are built into this system. Harry, what is it that you might need to get done in a building that you as the leaseholder, or your mum in your case, has no say over?
So roof repairs or utility meters. So in our building, the developer actually put in refurbished utility meters that didn't work, and they were never replaced. We're now 22 years in. The landlord's obviously ripping them all out and putting them in, but there's a conflict of interest there because the landlord sees the home as a cash machine. And the point is, I'm not necessarily saying this landlord, but we have seen it in our building and also other buildings as well, is that sometimes they'll use procurement companies or related companies to sit between them and the leaseholder. So they're marking up or grossing up the cost. That's not true market pricing. So if you need to fix your roof on a freehold house, I could go around and shop around for the best price. I can't do that when I'm a leaseholder. Someone who is my adversary picks the quote and you have to pay it all. So the fact is that, and this, when you bring in the managing agent, it makes it worse because the managing agent gets a cut or a percentage fee from the total cost. So the higher the cost, the more money they make.
So you're telling me that let's say this is a big development. Let's say it costs £1 million to do the roof. And your managing agent is charging a percentage, what, 15%?
Yeah, 15%,
15%
or 20 in some cases. Yeah.
So 15-20% of that £1 million. How much is 15-20% of £1 million? Come on, quickly. 150 to 230.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Sorry, it's been a long night doing that consultation, I'll tell you that.
So look, so they're getting a huge amount of money
For handling.
for simply being an intermediary.
Yeah, correct. Middleman. Yeah.
Right. And then you talked also about the procurement process. Sometimes there being arm's length companies in there.
Well, not arm's length. So companies that are related to the landlord or the managing agent.
Yes, a separate company.
Yeah, separate company, but
same
it might be
beneficial owner.
beneficial owner or another director or someone that's a front. And the fact is that you have to ask yourself the question, the people that are managing the major works, are they doing it to get the best price for the leaseholder? Maybe not.
Or the best job.
Or the best job. So they could get in really terrible quality meters.
Best price. You want a roof that's going to last for 60, 100.
But you don't want to pay double the actual market price because someone's made a kickback off it. And the fact is that because it's very hard to get transparency, you'll never fully know. But even under the proposed government proposals, unless you have control, they will always find ways to hide this. What is happening is people are being defrauded in their homes.
Okay, Shula, I want to come to you again now, because you say you've got the gold standard, right?
We have.
And that is you own the freehold as well as your lease. So you are your own landlord.
We are.
Now, that's great, but there are very few properties that are leasehold with a share of freehold.
Absolutely.
Right? It doesn't make your neighbours nicer people, though, does it? And sometimes, if you've got 200 people living in a big block of flats together, you're going to get some, if I can put it not too politely, some awkward squad that says, well, I don't agree with that, or I don't want to do this. And so we're back in a position where there is still going to be conflict. How does that work out? And how does the fact that you have this right to manage, that you are your own landlord, how does that control that?
In terms of owning the freehold and also being leaseholders, one has to wear two hats. So although at present this is the most common form of freedom that one has, the gold standard, as Harry has said, and as you have said, Barry, is absolutely common hold, because common hold is a democracy and goes by voting procedures, so that if you do have an awkward squad, which we all have, and they may think of us as the awkward squad, then we have the true principles of democracy with common hold.
Great. So basically, everybody gets a vote.
Yes.
And is it a simple majority? Is it a 2/3 majority? How does it
These
work?
are laid down in the Common Hold Unit Owners Association statement, and various sorts of works will need various majorities. And this is the same way as the whole of the rest of the world is run, and there is absolutely no reason why we should be so far behind.
Great. Now,
Very quickly, your government has actually switched on a key part of the Leasehold and Freehold Reform Act 2024, which is not common hold, it's not buying the freehold, but there's a stampede of leaseholders using it right now. It's called Right to Manage. Yes. And you campaigned very aggressively for that under the last government. I know for the 2002 Act as well. And I'm pleased to say our own building are now pursuing that, because one of the benefits of the reforms that have come through is not only more people in mixed use buildings, so you might be above some shops, you might be above a hotel or something like that, you'll be able to qualify if you've got a majority of the floor space. But for a lot of people that were not in mixed use, but it was a big issue, is that if you wanted to do Right to Manage before March, you had to pay the other side's costs. Yeah. So you had to pay your lawyers and theirs.
I just want to explain that to people, because again, there's it's a very technical area, this. But just to explain to the audience,
what is right
if you were living in a development where it was 25% of that development at the bottom was commercial premises. So it could have been a gym, a commercial gym, or a supermarket or a GP surgery or whatever. Yeah. And that precluded you from having the right to manage, didn't it?
Correct.
Now, tell us how that's been done away with, and tell us what the proposals are, because we should be referring back to the consultation that's just closed in there to actually make this so much easier.
So there was a big campaign and I was part of it. And basically the Law Commission originally said we're all right with 25%, but that was already a kind of a concession to the freeholder lobby, the big landlords that want to keep control of our service charges and our block management. In the end, the last government was persuaded that it should go up to 50% because the Law Commission said, actually, for those that are in a majority residential building, surely they should have rightful control of their homes, their monies and their lives. That happened. An election was called. The legislation actually nearly fell. Labour came to the rescue in the wash-up and said, no, we want this. We will support this. Let's do it. Let's not play games. Let's do this. And then in March, ahead of timetable, they switched it on. And the thing is that with that right to manage, while it doesn't get rid of the freeholder, they could still cause trouble in some areas in terms of license to sell, other issues, ground rent, lease extensions, things like that. But you do have some semblance of control, and it's not as good as commonhold. It's not as good as owning the freehold, but you've got an elected board of residents, of leaseholders. It might even not be a leaseholder. It might be a partner of a leaseholder who has got a background in building or background in engineering or background in accountancy. But the fact is it's self-rule, and that is an incredible thing. And we're hearing from many of our members, they're running for right to manage right now.
Right. Now, tell me this. Do you see it's almost the good driving out the best, is the question I'm asking you. Is the fact that people now have the ability to get the right to manage, is that making people say, oh, well, I've got the right to manage, I don't need to go the whole hog?
No, because what it's doing is it's waking people up to the benefits of having control. And then they think, well, what's this sort of sponge you're doing on the building? Getting the ground rent, maybe charging for having a cat.
You don't mince your words when it comes to talking about the land.
But it's true though, because they really don't contribute anything and they just extract more money. And the fact is, especially if you've got a short lease, you think, oh, I want to buy the freehold. And if you're in a mixed use building, they may use the commercial against the right to manage company to blow it up. So that's going to be a big issue we're going to see.
So look, we'll go on to talk about getting to the commonhold situation. But what I want to ask now is, we've mentioned insurance, and I know you had a big case in your block. Shula, tell us some of the problems that arise with people who find that they are paying the insurance costs, and maybe talk a little bit about what this consultation is proposing there.
One of the issues that I've noticed is the infantilization of leaseholders. So, for example, when leaseholders get right to manage, they will frequently be overtaken by a managing agent who helps them get right to manage, which is never what the government intended. And because they are put down and infantilized by the huge number of regulations and told all the time, these are very complicated, you need a managing agent. The managing agent will offer to fix up the insurance, and I specialise in assisting people to get right to manage, and the number of times I have seen them say, oh, the agent says they will deal with it. And I say, yes, but they're going to get a fat commission. Leaseholders have to have the confidence to know that in our everyday lives, we are brain surgeons, we are ticket collectors, we are people who can perfectly well handle life, and we can handle life and take our own insurance and take things into our own hands and cut out these commissions.
Right. And of course, if you're insuring a big block of flats, let's say 100, 200 homes in there, you effectively are a bulk buyer, aren't you? So you should be able to negotiate a decent commission. Just briefly, Harry, and as
the very famous case, so down the road, it's our sister estate called Canary Riverside. The leaseholders spent 4 or 5 years actually in tribunal trying to find out whether any commissions were paid that obviously was in their service charge to a landlord or a landlord-related company, they got to the bottom of it. Originally, the tribunal said, go away. This is a fishing. They used the language of landlords, saying it's a fishing expedition. And because of this really talented, retired accountant, she kept going, and they found out that there was a landlord-related company that had grossed up, so they had increased the insurance costs to by 1.6 million and made a commission. And in our building, thanks to that,
let's be. But I want people to understand the scale.
So a landlord-related company added to the original cost.
Exactly.
That shouldn't have been there in the first place. So 1.6 million with the tax.
So this was a sort of arm's length broker.
A broker, FCA regulated, but then paid away some of what they were getting from the insurer to the landlord-related company.
Exactly.
Without the leaseholder giving their consent and without their
And
knowledge.
they didn't know.
They didn't know.
Right.
So it's behind their back. And thanks to that case, we found out our own building under the same landlord, there was a commission of over £1 million. And yet we've not had any of that money back. And that shows you the conflict of interest in leasehold, that the freeholder sees your home as a cash machine.
Yes.
They don't care about being some noble custodian. They're there to milk you.
Well, look, one of the things that I picked out in the consultation document is where they're talking about insurance
and disclosure.
They say, well, look, the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, has come up with some new rules.
Forms,
right? And those rules say that they should declare where there is a conflict of interest. And they set out where an insurance broker is required to declare a conflict of interest. But, I mean, surely we don't want simply to know that there is a conflict of interest.
We don't want a conflict of interest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We don't want the conflict of
The
interest.
secret is sometimes in the contract that the managing agent signs with the leaseholders. And this again is a question of leaseholders really not appreciating that it is we the people that are in charge, because a managing agent's contract will often say where there is a commission payable, you give permission for us to take that commission, and if you want to know how much it is, we will tell you. So even if the government were to say no commissions unless the leaseholders know, let us realise that the secret is in the small print, and the secret is us realising that we are the client when we get right to manage, if and when we get common hold, if we are a resident management company. There is still hidden in the small print various traps that if one doesn't read things carefully, one isn't in charge, although one thinks one is.
Yeah. And Shula, in the consultation document, I just want to set this out because it is complicated, but it is really important. The three situations outlined at section 112 of the consultation say that it is acceptable for the insurance broker to own up to 10% of the insurance undertaking or the firm. Well, it's not, is it? There's a conflict of interest wherever and whenever the parties arranging the insurance are failing to act in the best interest of
the leaseholders,
who are actually the customer here.
And all they're doing is cutting and pasting very generic material from the FCA. It needs to be really suitable to the leasehold context. They should be explaining that the freeholder has a conflict of interest where they're procuring the policy not in the leaseholder's best interest, but for their own remuneration. And that's not been laid out yet, but hopefully we can get to that position.
Yeah, good. Okay, look, we've talked quite a bit about how bad things have been. We've talked a little bit about how they're getting better. Move us on to the next stage. Where
we need to move. And this is where it's nice to sort of there is a few other proposals in the consultation where they've gone at it from the wrong angle. So obviously control is a big issue. And some of the proposals is, would it be right for leaseholders to have a veto over the freeholder or the landlord's choice of managing agent? Now, our campaign, Free Leaseholders, we're against that because it distracts from buying the freehold or getting right to manage, or when the government bring forward those reforms to revive common hold. Because what it does is that you might block the landlord's first choice of managing agent, but you'll just go and choose another managing agent to loot you with. And the fact is, the managing agent is only as good as the person that appoints them. if the landlord is a rogue, they're going to rip you off anyway. So for us, we need to make things like right to manage easier. And you're right. What we don't want is a halfway house of right to manage being the mainstream. What it needs to be is almost like the glide path to common hold. And that's where what we want to do. And I think your colleagues, I mean, you were brilliant on this as well in the last Parliament, but Rachel Blake, the new Labour MP for Cities of London, Westminster.
I was hoping Rachel was going to join us on the panel, but she
Very good,
couldn't,
yeah, I get that.
unfortunately. Yeah.
She's proposed a 10-minute rule bill to say, you know, because you pushed on this in the last Parliament, to say at the moment to get right to manage, you've got to get 50% of a whole building. And for lots of buildings, particularly bigger ones, you've got lots of buy-to-let landlords or overseas owners that are hard to trace. And she's saying bring it down to 35%, but only those that respond to the notice. So it's a very, very advanced proposal, which actually makes sense. So the ones that care about the building, whether it's yes or no, they're the ones that matter. But the beautiful thing about it is you do not disenfranchise people that may be overseas or that buy to let who do care. So it's a very good proposal that we hope the government will adopt or even improve. So that's very positive.
Let's just cash that out, because it is important, because somebody might listen to you and say, hang on,
what was it about?
35%? Well, that means 65% haven't agreed to it. So surely that's not right. Now, it's trying to explain to people the difficulties of getting in a big building where most of those people very often are not the actual leaseholder. They're a tenant of the leaseholder. They're renting it from the leaseholder. And therefore they've no interest in that or in passing the information on.
And even with some of these overseas owners, you try to explain leasehold to them, and bless their hearts, they think that they've owned the flat. So they can go away, I'm not getting involved in any legal action or right to manage. And some of them, as long as they get their rental yield, they get their rent covered, that's fine. But they're not the ones that are living with the leaks. They're not the ones that are living with no windows being washed in 2 years. They're not the ones that are living with no lifts working. You've got 4 lifts, you're down to 158 flats. It's a nightmare. Building can't cope. So I think that is a very pragmatic move to make it easier for those that have got the most active interest in the building.
So where did Rachel's...
There is an answer to this. Of course, once one has right to manage, unlike owning the freehold, every leaseholder has a right to join. So even if the right to manage company was started by 2 people, even if only 12 people out of 100 supported it, right to manage legislation is such that any and every qualifying leaseholder can join at any time at no charge and has an equal vote. And because right to manage is run according to company law, 5%, now it's only 5, which is down from 10, of the members of the company can call a general meeting if they're not happy with what is going on. So right to manage is about the nearest one can get to a democracy rather than common hold. Unfortunately, some barristers are subverting the rules in tribunals, and it's become slightly harder according to how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. But it doesn't really matter how many start it off. It is for the many, not the few.
That's I think, a really important point to understand, that yes, it may be small when it starts, but it's democratized.
Yes.
It's available to anybody who needs it and who needs recourse.
And I think a really important point, because the lobbyists on the other side are suggesting that right to manage means that the leaseholders are in the corridors fixing the lights. Is not correct. You can still appoint a managing agent. The difference is the managing agent works for you and not some company in Monaco or BVI that's a rip-off.
And you're not trying to rip yourself off.
Exactly. There you go.
Right. Okay, so let's move us on now.
And very quickly, one other proposal that some of our friends are suggesting. Rachel's proposal is brilliant, but what about the idea that you could have an implied term in the lease that says that everyone in the building is a member of the right to manage company, and overnight these buildings, maybe you've got to have a 6-month, 2-year grace period, they all become subject to right to manage.
Nice.
So there are big ideas that are going out there now for the next legislation.
Okay, one of the other benefits of right to manage, and I noticed you mentioned, Harry, appointing one's own agent, is it can destroy the dominance of the term of the managing agent. In my opinion, the managing agent comes from feudal times when we used to have estate managers. The managing agent is written nowhere in the law apart from the Secretary of State approving a code of conduct. In my own block, we have developed the idea, and this is what I recommend to the right to manage companies that I assist. Why can we not have a management team? Why can we not have, if we're large enough, specialists in accounting, in surveying, and the new resident engagement strategy, a safety manager? If the block is big enough, one can have properly educated and properly qualified specialists that are not managing agents who, as Harry might say, bless their hearts, are usually qualified in absolutely nothing and have just fulfilled the requirements of a tick list of yes, no, to make sure that they know the rules. So right to manage can bring us a whole new way of management as well as the right to decide that.
Major works.
Yes.
Tell us about major works.
Oh, major works.
And again, let's try and focus on what the government's suggesting here. And what are the ways in which this whole area of major works can be captured by the landlord interest instead of you, the resident?
First of all, the whole idea of major works is that leaseholders are given time to make observations, and the management agent and the freeholder must do what's called pay attention. Now, our usual pay attention to the observations.
And that is because they've gone out and they've sourced a number of potential contractors, and they then come to you as the leaseholder and say, okay, we're proposing to appoint this one, and you then have the opportunity in that consultation to go back to them.
What happens is, number one, notice of intention. There's something wrong with the building. We've got to do something. This is what's wrong. Do you want to suggest a contractor? Rules, 30 days, suggest a contractor. Next 30 days, the freeholder or the managing agent goes out to those contractors, gets a quote, issues a notice of estimate, pays attention again to the observations. If the least expensive or the leaseholder's choice is not appointed, another 3 weeks. So altogether, it can take 10 to 12 weeks. People don't realise that in the context of Section 20 consultation on major works, consultation doesn't mean consultation. It just means we'll ask you what you think, and if we feel like doing anything, we will, and if we don't, we won't. So my idea is that we go right back to the Section 20 as it was first envisaged, which was when I beat our freeholders and got the bill down from 2 million to 1 million. We have a 1-month consultation period, and leaseholders are free from the start to go out and get their own quotes from their own contractors, and the best quote wins. I managed to chop off £750,000 in 1996 using that. We should, as homeowners, we should have the same rights as if we owned our own home. And it's all part of the infantilization of leaseholders in that, of course, we can deal with contractors and of course we can get our own quotes. I'd like to simplify everything and have a 1-month period.
The government are proposing, though, to reduce the timeframes, and also at the moment, and I know the value of money has changed since 2002, but it's not changed that much. They're saying that at the moment you've got to have the process of consultation when it hits £250 of spending per leaseholder. They're saying hike that up right up to 600, reduce the timeframes, and for the fact is, we've got to understand here that leaseholders are volunteers. They have jobs, families, lives. Some of these landlords, my own as well, they will time these major works around holiday periods. So you're even more busy than you normally would be. And actually trying to get rival quotes is not easy. You've got to research contractors, you've got to pitch to them, they might want a site visit. So if the government reduces those time frames, it in a way restricts the power of leaseholders. And as you've said, Shula, the power of leaseholders is already rather marginal in this process. And I think you campaigned on it in the last Parliament, Barry. There's a famous Supreme Court case called Dejan. And obviously you passed the legislation in 2002 to actually force this proper consultation by landlords of leaseholders. And what happened is a rich landlord went all the way up to the top court and blew up the will of Parliament. It was almost like a Brexit rerun. You know, the fact is that no, Parliament hasn't corrected that, and that is the one positive policy from the government on this consultation on major works, is that they're saying we understand what's been argued in Parliament. They didn't say you directly, but they could have done. And they said we intend to reverse the Dejan decision, because at the moment that means if the landlord can say it's an emergency, it goes through a rubber stamp process in tribunal. And even if it's not a genuine emergency, 19, there's been academic research done on it by Dr. Howard Soper and Professor Sue Bright. And it's at 98, 99% they get their dispensation. And the problem is it's on leaseholders
and that
to prove why there should have been consultation.
The resident out of the picture
completely.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that's wrong.
And all they need to say is, oh, we need to do this quickly.
Yeah.
It's an emergency.
Even if they've sat on the works for 10 years, they somehow then hoodwink the tribunal. And we've had our own case in the tribunal. The tribunal says they get where we're coming from, but they have to go on the Dejan case.
Yeah, I mean,
and that's
it's very interesting, because actually it's almost an incentive for a bad landlord or a managing agent to say, yeah, I won't do the roof just yet. I know it's got problems.
Let's manufacture an emergency.
But let's wait until it gets so bad
it's going to collapse
that I'm able to say, this is an emergency, I've got to get in there. And at that stage,
he's rinsing you now, yeah.
Well, in more ways.
Exactly.
The consultation requirements were intended to protect people. If your landlord didn't go through the correct consultation procedure and it was more than £250 per flat, then you only paid £250. The law has not changed. What has changed is the interpretation of it, because a very clever barrister persuaded a judge that the leaseholders had to show some prejudice. Therefore, leaseholders quite rightly believe in the letter of the law, as it says in their Section 153 Notice of Rights and Obligations. If your landlord has not gone out to consultation, you only have to pay £250. A leaseholder will point to that, and I will say, sorry, no, that's not true. You have to show prejudice. So by clever barristers commandeering the first-tier tribunal and the upper courts, the law itself can actually be diverted when it suits them to the black and white letter of the law, and when it suits them otherwise to the intention of the law.
And again, I just want to make it absolutely clear that this was a way of protecting leaseholders. It was a way of saying, look, if you don't get the consultation that you're due, the maximum you would have to pay, it might be £1 million to fix the roof, but the maximum you would have to pay is £250. And that was a very powerful incentive to make sure that that consultation happened. In fact, I've got a case in the constituency at the moment where we think we've managed to show that the landlord failed to do that necessary consultation, and we will be saving the leaseholders there a very great deal of money for exactly that reason. But absolutely so important to do that.
And the thing is, if you've not got right to manage, you've not got your freehold, it's literally the only kind of structured opportunity to scrutinise and even cancel spending. Because we've been very lucky in our building. We've had this amazing guy called Paul, who's got a background in contracts, building works, and he's saved hundreds of thousands off the proposed works of the landlord. And what happens is the landlord just doesn't proceed because we've rumbled him.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to have to draw to a close, but we can't possibly draw to a close without talking about what we need in that bill to give us common hold.
What we need in that bill to give us common hold is a far easier way of obtaining the freehold, which will then obviously give us common hold, and also reducing the number of people that need to vote for common hold. That is the simplest thing. I was on the Lord Chancellor's Committee in 2002 when common hold was introduced, and in my opinion, there's actually nothing wrong with it apart from solicitors don't like it, people are suspicious of it, and the threshold to convert to common hold is ridiculously high. It should be brought down to 50% as everything else.
And Shula, would you say that every new build of a block of flats has to be commonhold. No more leasehold in the future.
Thank you so much for that. This is incredibly important. Why do we not give preference to commonhold in planning? It's perfectly reasonable for all local authorities to give preference to commonhold, and absolutely there should be a sunset clause on commonhold as we asked for in 2002.
On sunset clause on leasehold.
Totally.
Yes.
A sunset clause of leasehold as we asked for in 2002 and which we have been fighting for ever since.
Absolutely.
And buying the
where?
freehold, the devil is in the details. So the freeholders are suing the government under the Human Rights Act and the European Convention of Human Rights. I have to mention it. And they're saying that the reforms passed by the last government, which Labour made happen in the wash-up, is confiscatory. And what they're trying to do is not only win that case, but to scare off this Labour government from going further.
These are the landlords.
The landlords, big landlords, some of them offshore. And the fact is that they've got some of the biggest, and the best creme de la creme barristers you can buy. And the point is that the next bit is setting the rates at how much you have to pay to buy out the freeholder. And the problem is if they set that deferment rate too low, actually leasehold will be paying more than the current position. And the problem is that what we're saying is actually, the problem is this policy could get captured by corporate interests. Actually, why don't we do what they've done in Northern Ireland, what they did in Ireland, what they did in Scotland? 10 times ground rent and you've bought out your freehold. And for those really onerous, really high ground rents, you have that cap in, sure. But even as well, something that's gone very, very quiet is that the last government was pushing peppercorn ground rents, turning existing ground rents into zero financial value. If we did that, most of the value in the freeholds would be drained. And actually that's what we need from this government. And beyond that, to make sure that the rates are set to actually make it cheaper for leaseholders. That's key, because it's going to be, if it's worse than the current position, that is not a good reform.
Absolutely. No. Can I just thank both of you? This has been a whirlwind tour of everything that's wrong with our feudal system of property management. But what I really do hope is that it's enabled people to understand a bit more about what the reforms are, what the reforms that are needed are. And let's hope, guys, that actually our new Secretary of State, Steve Reed, watches this video, pays a bit of attention, and we get the right legislation through. Thank you, everybody, for being here.